What's going on, Alabama fans? How are you doing? Welcome back to Bama News. This is Patrick Greenfield. Obviously, it was a good weekend for Alabama fans. The SEC champions have been crowned, and it is the Crimson Tide. We're bringing in Mike Rodak, our Alabama beat writer, to talk a little bit about that, a little bit about award season, and a little bit about the Cotton Bowl. Number one, Alabama will face Cincinnati at 2:30 on New Year's Eve, so that'll be great. But let's how you doing, Mike? How was Atlanta?
It was good. It was always a nice quick trip, but an eventful trip, and kind of had to come right back. And that selection show comes up quickly. It's a quick turnaround, and then it's like right into the bowl season. We're already talking to Luke Fickell and Nick Saban by Sunday afternoon about a game that they haven't even had a chance to look at the other team yet. So it's always a busy weekend, and the good part is you kind of get the chance coming out of it where like this is finals week for players, so they're not really in tune with anything, and then coaches are out recruiting, and the media kind of gets a little bit of a break this week, and then we finally reconvene a little bit later.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to ask you kind of what the process is for the Crimson Tide through December. It is funny. I don't know if that's publicly available video of the Luke Fickell, Nick Saban joint press conference. They seem to have their own thoughts about what was happening in the press conference after the announcement.
Yeah, a little bit. It's one of those where it's like, I mean, it was probably 2 or 3 hours after it came out. So, I mean, theoretically, they could have watched each other days ago if they thought that they would have a chance. But, I mean, realistically, that's not happening. So, Saban's never watched a minute of Cincinnati, and Fickell's really hasn't watched a minute of Alabama. So, you can't sit there and say, hey, how do they look? I mean, because they don't know. They don't know the answer to the question yet.
I'd like to imagine Fickell watched Alabama one time. And you'd like to think Saban maybe watched Jerome Ford, the star running back, former Alabama player, transfer for Cincinnati. But hey, real quick before we get into Cincinnati or any of that, we'll have a lot of time. Let's go back to the SEC championship. Quick relook. What were your takeaways from Saturday?
Yeah, I think surprising, not shocking, was the words I used on Sunday. Because I do think that given the way Georgia had gone throughout the season, there was a lot of hype about them, quite frankly, and I don't know if the schedule or the opponents or the caliber of the opponents completely back that up. Having given up 6.9 points per game all season, it wasn't. They hadn't been tested anything like what Alabama was going to test them like, and I think we knew that going into the game. So I expected it to be a more competitive game than what Georgia had been used to. I expected Alabama to put more points on the board than what Georgia had been giving up. But I didn't expect a 41-24 game. That was, I think, the most surprising part, where Alabama was so successful. And it really came within like a small window of the game. It was the 5 drives in a row in the second quarter, beginning of the third quarter. Obviously, the first quarter didn't go well for Alabama, 10-0. And at that point, you're like, all right, like they're really going to have to show something here, even if they lose the game, to make the playoff. And then the last part of the game, they were kind of hanging on a little bit because Georgia's defense was able to make some plays. Alabama's defense was able to make plays themselves, but it really took until that last drive when Bryce Young hit Slade Bolden over the middle for 24 yards that kind of got them going, and that's really what sealed it. So it was a Heisman clinching game for Bryce Young, but it all kind of came within that condensed window. And
I was going to point out one play. I know Mike Coscarone had put there was like 3 main Heisman moments for Bryce Young. This one was in particular. Bama fans remember this happened in the second quarter. He got sacked, or he got hit on the run and lost the fumble. And somehow Bryce Young was able to come up with that fumble over an amazing defense, obviously, and his stature, his size. I really felt that was a huge mental break in the game for Georgia. And then he went and led another scoring drive. That was in the second quarter, right before Mechie got hurt. Can you just talk about Bryce Young's brilliance? You can mention that play. You can mention some of the other things and what he really showed us.
I didn't really realize that he had gotten a fumble back. I mean, it happened pretty quickly, and it was down at the far end of the field from the press box in Atlanta. And my eyes were kind of on John Mechie because that, like, you could tell right away that wasn't good. With the way he went down, and then the play was happening beside him, and he was still on the field. Like, that's where my eyes were. I saw Bryce fumble, and you could hear the crowd reaction. And that was the other thing, too. I mean, this crowd it surprised me the extent to which Georgia fans dominated. Like, it was, I'd say, at least 80%, 85% Georgia fans, where I figured maybe not 50-50, but I figured Alabama fans would certainly be there more than what we really saw. It was just kind of one corner of the field where the Alabama fans were. So you could tell by the crowd reaction about the fumble, but I didn't catch that he even recovered it until, we saw it on TV in the booth. So, I mean, it's one of those hidden plays that it's probably not going to show up on a stat sheet, but it allowed him to, I think, run for the touchdown, which was right after that. And it certainly was a big play in the game. And it's just another one where I think Bryce Young has a lot of instincts that are really hard to teach. And it looked like from that video, that's the first time I saw it from that angle. His head was almost down. His head's like barely, I guess he's looking right there, but it seems
really
like
went and grabbed it.
Right. He grabbed it and he was
4 Georgia players.
It's like he almost just did it instinctively to put his arm out and get the football.
It's interesting you note the fan, obviously Bryant Denny. I have a nice little Twitter stat that, Alabama is 7-0 in Mercedes-Benz Stadium since the opening in 2017. The Atlanta Falcons, they play there 8 times a year, and they've never won more than 5 games. So It is amazing the success that Alabama has in Bryant Denny East, a.k.a. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and that consistency. Real fast kind of turn. We're going to get one more. We'll get back into Bryce. Anything to say on John Mechie? Here was the play that happened on that same drive. Non-contact injury. Saban said it's a significant injury, significant knee injury on the selection show. Can you kind of talk about this?
Yeah, and he confirmed later Sunday that it was an ACL, so he's done.
Yeah.
He's out. And the ACL timeline's not as bad as it once was. I mean, it's probably a 7, 8, 9 month injury. Where in terms of like the NFL, I guess that's the first part of it. Like, he has a decision to make whether he wants to enter the NFL draft. I would assume that he still will, because he's still top 7 or 8 receiver in his class and has kind of been a borderline first-round pick this entire season in terms of what's been projected. I mean, maybe this knocks him down slightly, but I don't think any NFL team is really going to worry too much about like a simple ACL injury. Those are very run-of-the-mill, quite frankly. Landon Dickerson, I don't think was hurt too much by his one last year. So even if he's a second-round pick, early second-round pick, that's a pretty good spot for him to be, I would say. So if he's back 8 months from now, 9 months from now, that's the beginning of the season. So I don't think he'll be able to do pre-draft stuff, or he won't be able to do, the combine and pro days and all that, which I don't know how much teams will need that out of him.
I think they have enough footage. And, an interesting part is this was his stat line before the injury, which a lot of people would take that in an entire game,
Right.
And he didn't even play through the second quarter. Obviously a big part of that SEC championship win. We're going to be able to talk a little bit about how Mechie's absence will affect Alabama's game plan. But I kind of wanted to go into the award season, the show, College Football Award Show. Sorry, I'm pulling up a lot of stuff right here, people. Will be Thursday. Saturday will be the Heisman, which Bryce Young was named. But maybe you can talk on some of these other guys, because last night, Will Anderson won the Bronco Nagurski Award, which is awarded to the best defensive player in the nation.
Yeah, so some of these awards are a little bit archaic in some of the definitions that they have. So I know people were a little bit upset about Anderson not winning the I'm already blanking on it, the Butkus Award.
The Butkus, yes.
He was on like the initial watch list and I think the midseason, and it's like all of a sudden he was off the final list, and apparently the committee that selects that award thought that he plays too much on the edge, that he's too much of a down lineman with his hand in the dirt. He does a little bit of that, but like he still plays standing up a lot. And modern football doesn't really lend itself to some of these definitions, like the Outland Trophy being interior lineman, but interior lineman really means guard or tackle, because it's kind of the old school definition of football where you had tight ends and split ends, and then your tackles were on the interior. Like, that's not how football is played anymore, but this is kind of how these awards came about, and that's still how they're being given out. And then there's multiple awards for different positions. It's a little bit messy.
My highlights.
Yeah.
I'd say that's even funnier because a few years ago, Khalil Mack in the NFL won. I want to say he won the best defensive player or defensive end and the best linebacker. So there already is some precedent at another level with that. But we have Will Anderson. He's going to be a finalist on Thursday for another top defensive player award. Jameson Williams is going to be a finalist for the top wide receiver, the Biletnikoff. And then Bryce Young is obviously lined up for multiple quarterback and player of the year awards.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of the rundown. And yeah, I was just going to say, coming from the NFL, it's a little bit cleaner award system than what college is. And it's because these are all given out by the Charlotte Touchdown Club and all these different organizations. And it's very decentralized and it's not consistent. And again, I don't think it really lends itself to how football is being played these days with some of the definitions. But that's the reason why Anderson wasn't in the Buckus, but he is part of the Bednarik best player and best defensive player in college football award, which will come out Thursday. And then, Bryce with pretty much all the quarterback awards, but not the Unitas award, which, he has to be an upperclassman. It's a little bit silly, again, because of how college football is played these days. How many senior quarterbacks that are the best in the country are there? I mean, there's just not that very many. Mac Jones was last year, because Burrow the year before, but usually these guys come out after 3 years. So
how about Mac Jones last night? 3 throws, 3 attempts?
Yeah. He was in the NFL for one team, and I think it was almost 50 years, 1974.
Yeah. I will say 2 things. There's one big question I think Alabama fans really want to know. But I will say, what's college football first without tradition? That's what college football is. And what is it without being decentralized? Obviously, the playoffs and who gets in and the expansion, nobody can agree on because it's so spread out and it's very regionalized. But more so, we got the 4 Heisman finalists last night, and Will Anderson was not on that list. Why was Will Anderson not invited to New York City for the Saturday ceremony, but Aiden Hutchinson from Michigan was?
So it's all based on the voting, and there's 928 voters this year. The vast majority of those are media members, and it's all grouped across the country. There's, I think, 7 or 8 different regions, and then the rest of the voters are the past Heisman winners. So it's really a media award, and I think regionally, and we won't see the breakdown by region until after the final ceremony is on Saturday. But my guess is that you're going to see a pretty heavy split where the northern region of the voting block probably lean more towards the guys that they saw more. Hutchinson at Michigan, CJ Stroud at Ohio State, Kenny Pickett at Pittsburgh, where I think more the southern voters are probably going to lean more towards Bryce Young. And I think everybody in general is going to pick Bryce Young to be number 1. But in terms of picking their 3 on their ballot, Bryce Young, Will Anderson, maybe one of the other guys who are, more northern players might be on some of the southern ballots. But at the end of the day,
is there just a Bama fatigue? I mean, is this giving Karl Malone the MVP? I mean, obviously we think Bryce is going to get it, but just to even be on that stage is a big deal. And it's funny, you can have a quarterback, although CJ Stroud's obviously good, who couldn't even win his own conference, couldn't even win his own division. You clearly have another defensive player who is second to Will Anderson in some of the most important categories. Obviously, his teammate Bryce Young. And then you have Kenny Pickens. No offense, he might be the number 1 quarterback off the board next year, but he beat Wake Forest in a conference. I mean, woo!
So, so this year they're only taking 4 finalists, and that's the way that they're going to do it going forward. It used to be like they would look at the voting results, and if there was a big gap, let's say between 3rd and 4th, or 4th and 5th, or 5th and 6th, then they would take that many people until there was a gap. This year, it's only 4. So Will Anderson might very well have been a very close 5th, and under the old system might have been a finalist who went to New York City. But the way they're doing it now is just the top 4. And so it's not really the Heisman trust or the Heisman people that are picking the finalists. It's just it's the top 4 vote getters, and the vote getters are entirely determined by the media. So, I guess yell at the media if you're mad about the Anderson and Hutchinson thing, because again, I think it's simply a result of the voting. And I think when we see the voting, I would imagine that the voters from Big Ten country probably leaned a lot more towards Aiden Hutchinson than they did Will Anderson.
It will be amazing to see.
To be honest, if I'm not a voter, but if I had to put my 1, 2, 3, certainly I think Will Anderson would warrant a lot of consideration, but I can't say that I've watched a whole lot of Michigan. So just as much as Big Ten voters you might have fair criticism against them for not watching enough Will Anderson, it's probably working the other way around, where I can't say that I watched enough Michigan to really know about Aiden Hutchinson.
Are you saying that we have bias? No. We watch a lot of Alabama football down here. We can kind of move on with that, and I agree. And I was thinking earlier this year when I watched Will Anderson, everybody's talking about him. Watch out for Will Anderson. I mean, Bryce Young has to be there next year, but watch out for Will Anderson's campaign next year. Both will be intense. We're going to wrap up real fast. Obviously, Alabama reclaimed the number 1 spot. They're going to be facing number 4 Cincinnati in the Cotton Bowl. I know that we're going to kind of talk about this, and you're going to write articles, and we'll have a lot to say over the next month. 27 days between games. I'm kind of curious, first of all, what does the schedule look like? We know finals are this week for Alabama. What is the lull, and what is the process, especially compared to last year when everything was kind of ran up? December 19th SEC championship game, I believe, last year.
Yep. Yeah, that was a pretty quick turnaround where it was, the championship game, and then it was kind of a short little Christmas break, and then they were right into, preparing for at least the Rose Bowl last year, which was at Dallas. Yeah. Although they didn't travel to Dallas until the day before. It was like a regular road game for them, for both of those, actually, the Dallas game and the Miami game against Ohio State. So this is going back to the traditional schedule where they're going to fly in 5 or 6 days in advance. Yep. And practice in Dallas, and then if they make it to Indianapolis, practice in Indianapolis as well. In between, we haven't gotten an exact schedule yet. This week is, again, finals, and coaches are out recruiting. Next week, I would assume they'll practice a little bit. The week after, maybe a little bit. But then there's that Christmas break that they'll probably want to have, and then they'll travel the 26th. I think Sunday the 26th is the day that they're scheduled to arrive in Dallas for this game.
I actually saw a quote from Najee. Somebody asked him how he was going to fare in the NFL because he did not play in December. And he said that the Bama practices were very competitive, very much like a game, and he would not have a problem.
And last year they were playing, like you mentioned, all the way into the 3rd weekend in December. So there's not a huge difference in this case.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the Bama standard, I would say. Okay, just real fast, How does Alabama match up with Cincinnati? We can go over this because I have one more dangerous question after this, but just real quick. I was going to say earlier with Stetson Bennett, Georgia had a really hard time coming from behind. They hadn't had to do it all year, and I think that was a big problem for Georgia. Cincinnati seems like a different team in that mindset as their offense. Can you kind of touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, Jerome Ford has been one of the better scorers in the country. I think he's in the top 5 in total touchdowns scored, and the former Alabama running back who didn't really see the field here is now their leading guy. So that's a big part of their offense. Desmond Ridder, their quarterback, and their defense, from everything that I've heard thus far. And again, I can't really say I've watched much Cincinnati this year. It seems like their secondary is more of the strength, which is kind of flip-flopping from where I think Georgia was.
Yes.
Obviously, it's a game where Alabama is going to be heavily favored. They are. It's like a 2-touchdown spread right now. But I think it's going to be a psychological thing, too, for Alabama, where all of their energy was about being an underdog against Georgia and wanting respect and proving the world wrong and all that. And that served them very well last week. They're not going to be able to play that card this time. And it's going to have to be an adjustment where they're going to be the favorite team. They're going to be expected to win. People might say they're looking past Cincinnati to, playing Georgia again or playing Michigan. So they're going to have to fight that a little bit. I'm sure Saban, and he already has mentioned how important it will be, just a psychological adjustment to kind of go back to that mentality of, hey, we're the favorites and we need to, stay that way. So that's going to be the biggest thing. The Mechie injury, not to discount John Mechie, but I think a lot of people last year when Jalen Waddle went down thought that Alabama was going to be hurt offensively, and they weren't.
David Pollock,
2 months of the year. Yeah. So, Jameson Williams is the best receiver in the country, probably going to win the Blitnikoff on Thursday night. Bryce Young's the best quarterback in the country, probably going to win, those awards on Thursday night. And that's still, I think, enough to get by.
I would say for Alabama, I think that they've had enough adversity And, if we're thinking about the LSU game, the Tennessee game, the Iron Bowl, and kind of coming of age of Bryce Young, I feel like Cincinnati, a lot of former players will tell you football is such a cool game because you really do need those 11 working all at the same time. That's why you have to give Cincinnati respect, because they have figured out how to play the team game. It's not just about individual talents. I think Alabama is hitting their stride, figuring out how to play 11 people at the same time. And you're going to have Bryce Young. I got a lot of respect for Cincinnati, but I would be betting on Alabama while it's that low right now. 13.5?
Yeah, 13.5. Okay. So.
Okay. Here's the last question, and we'll go into this. How dangerous would Georgia be in a rematch?
They'd be dangerous. I think, again, the psychological factor, I think, played a big role in this past game where Georgia probably felt comfortable or overconfident or whatever you want to call it. Alabama felt slighted and motivated and all that. And that's going to flip if they do see each other. I don't think it's a guarantee by any means. Michigan's a very good team. Michigan is the higher seed. So it's going to take a lot of effort for Georgia to recover and beat Michigan and even get to a potential meeting with Alabama.
Yeah.
It's going to take something from Alabama to beat Cincinnati.
It could be Michigan. I only put this out because the way the game happened and the way Georgia fans, everybody watching this knows Alabama, Georgia. They knew 2012. They know Tua in 26. They know the 2018 SEC championship game. All these psychological things, that had to be just such a hit to Kirby. Yeah. And maybe not the players because they weren't playing in those games. But, man, that was just a sledgehammer of psychology from Alabama on Saturday.
And I think it will be helpful for Alabama's case that this game, if they do play Georgia in the national championship, will be in Indianapolis. And I think you're going to see a more even split between Georgia and Alabama fans. I think a lot of Georgia fans would travel to that game because of the possibility of them winning a national title for the first time in a long time. But I think Alabama fans will travel too. That's also their MO. So I think that will be a more neutral sort of playing field. And I think Alabama would still be motivated, especially if they go into the game hearing the same things that, they can't win because they don't have Mechie this time around. Georgia's going to get them. There could be some external motivation. As much as Saban hates that, he pretty much admitted that they used it this past game, external factors for motivation. And that's, I think, could also drive them in a potential rematch.
Interesting. It'll be interesting to see what you write over the next few weeks and if Nick Saban reads it and hands that out to his team and stuff. No, I'm just kidding. Would be very interesting, Alabama, Michigan in a national title game. But I think one thing Alabama has taught us this entire year is not take one game at a time, because a lot of these we were like, it's going to be a blowout or this or that. And it hasn't. So I'll let them do their own work. Mike, appreciate you being on the show today. Like we said, the Cotton Bowl is going to be December 31st, number 4, Cincinnati, number 1, Alabama at 2:30 p.m. Central. So we'll have a lot of great content. Signing day is next week. Obviously, Nick Saban's on the recruiting trail this week. So we'll have a lot to recap. Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you.